Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everything in between. I'm Zen, and welcome to the first in the Forms series. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to make a whole range of forms. Really, we're going to sort of take one form and build on it bit by bit, creating different variations of them. We're going to start off with the login form, and we're going to look at a few bits and pieces on that. We're going to do a couple of different versions of it, and then we'll move on to a registration form where we have bigger, well, not necessarily bigger, where we will have different input types, and then we'll probably do a contact us form as well. So the first thing, as always, we're going to do is create a new page. As you can see, we're in the learning folder already, so we're just going to create a new file, and we're going to call this login-1.html. As always, we're going to use Emmet to give us a basic HTML5 page, and then we're going to add in an internal style sheet. Remember, this is fine when we are just practicing, and then we're going to go and actually create our form. So now we've got our basic page set up. We need to add the form tag. Now the form, as you can see here with Emmet, there's a get and post version. We're going to use the post version. There isn't just post and get methods. There are many different versions out there that you can use. However, post and get are the two most common. And I suppose at this point it is a really good idea to explain the difference between the two of them. So let's do that with actual examples from actual websites. So here we are at the Amazon website, and this is a really good place in order to show how the get command, or the get method, which you say, is used in forms. Now, all I'm going to do here is type in for graphics card. So I'm going to go for the NVIDIA, never spell it correctly, so NVIDIA 2080 Ti, and I'll select graphics card. What we can see in the address bar here is in fact the keywords NVIDIA 2080 Ti, graphics and card. There is some other stuff that's obviously stuff that the server application adds to it. Probably some of it is going to be to do about the browser and a few other bits and pieces, but we can actually see the keywords that I've used are in there. And in fact, you see this key, this K equals, and I'm assuming for Amazon, K here is keywords. These are the arguments that have been passed to it from the form. Okay. Now, the reason why they do this is really quite simple. It means that you can copy this address and send it to people. You know, you can see these are not cheap graphics cards. And let's just say I had a really great uncle, which I do, who was really rich. Unfortunately, he's not. And say, look, uncle, my favorite uncle, this is a graphic, you know, any of these graphic cards would be great for my birthday. Thank you very much. And, you know, he could then look at that address, put it on his own browser and see exactly what I see here. And this is why people use them as gets in forms in shops, is because the address can then be shared to show other people the same products that you are looking at. However, this would not be a good idea if we were doing it for a login form, because then you'll be able to see something like, you know, user equals, and then your username and password, and see this and bit here. Okay, so this is a different criteria. So, and password equals whatever that is. That's not my password, by the way, but you see what I mean. And then anyone who's walking over your shoulder, okay, you know, say you're in a shop or you're in college or in school, on a train, on a bus, wherever it is, and someone's look over your shoulder and they can see the address and see what your username and password is, it's no longer secure. Okay, so using the get is a really good idea for things like shops, for searching for items, not very good for security. There's also other limitations with the get command in that I can't remember the exact number, but it is limited to a certain number of characters. I can't remember if it's like 1024 or something like that, but it is limited to the number of digits that can be sent. The solution to that, like I said before, is the post command. Okay, and that's what we're going to be using in our website. Now the post, when it sends the information, it sends it in what's called the header of the request. Okay, and this gets a little bit more complicated to explain, but needless to say that when data is sent with the post method in a form, it is hidden to almost everybody. Yes, if someone's doing packet sniffing, they would still be able to see that post data, but essentially it stops the over-the-shoulder theft of data, if you like. Okay, so that's why we use post in login and registration forms. The action attribute is here. It basically says, when you send a form, where do you want me to send the data to? So you don't have to send the data to the same page. You can send it to any page, in fact to any website. You could actually make a form on your website and send that data to another website. And in fact, that's what a lot of phishing scams do. But we'll talk about that at a different time. So the action one just says, where do you want me to send the information to? Now, if you leave it blank, it sends it to itself by default. Okay, so if I don't put anything in here, it'll send it to login-1.html, because by default, the action is to itself. As usual, we can put in IDs, classes, and stuff like that. So we shall put in try and spell it correctly. We shall put in a class here and we will call it login. Okay. Now, I always like to try and format my code a little bit to make it easier to view. And in the most basic of forms basically come with a label and a input field. Okay. And so it takes form of label. The for in the label tells the browser what element the label is for, as it makes sense. So we're going to go for username, and then in between the label tags, okay, is the tags that people actually see for it. So as usual, we'll type in something like username and use a colon. Okay, so now we have our label. The next step is to have the element that the label is referring to. The one thing we should really do with our label though is to give it a class. Again, we're keeping with the then method, and the form is the block of the then method, and therefore the label and the input field are all going to be elements of the block. So because of that, the class of the label should be the block name, double underscore to represent the relationship, and then we're just going to put the term label so we know it's login label. And be very careful to make sure that you don't leave spaces. After our label, we need to put in the input field. Okay, and there are plenty of different types of input fields, but the most common one, and the one we're going to use right now, is the text version. And we're also going to make sure it has a class. So let's give it a class. Whoops. The class will be, again, using the then method. So it'd be login double underscore text hyphen field. Okay, and there we have it. So an input type text, name, ID, and the class. Now, we all know what the ID is. We've talked about that before, and there is a video somewhere explaining the difference between element, class, and ID. But we've not come across name before, so it's a good time now to explain it. As you know, we use class, IDs, and even the element type in CSS. In later videos, we're going to be seeing how we use ID, and in fact even class names again with JavaScript. And this will be how JavaScript attaches itself to elements in a form or any HTML element. However, you'll find that a lot of server-side code, and in particular the one that I'll be showing later on, being PHP, instead of using ID, it uses the name attribute of an element to for referencing. Okay, so you must have the name ID being the same thing. When we look at radio buttons, the name and ID fields become a lot more important as well. So we'll wait until we get to those, because we will go through almost all of the different form elements in the series. Okay, so let's give these names and IDs as well. So this is, as it says with the label, it is username, and we'll give the ID username as well, and we'll leave the class as it is. Okay, unlike the label where the element has a opening tag and a closing tag, the input field does not have a closing tag. It's just a a self-opening and closing tag. The form unit, as you see, the form element does have an opening and closing one, but the input field doesn't. And then I always like to have a little space between the two, and then we'll do the same again. So we're going to go label, we're going to give it the class of login label, and it is for the password. And so in our little space here, we'll put in the word password. And then again, we're going to use an input field for the data that's going to go in, but this time we're going to use password. The only difference between a input type text and input type password is that when you use the password field, you get those little dots and asterisks rather than seeing the letters. Okay, so it still holds text, but you don't see it visibly. And so the name for this, we're going to call it password. Its ID is going to be password, and I forgot to put in the class. So that's going to be, and it's still going to be use it as a text field, so that's okay. We're not going to do anything fancy with it regarding the CSS, so that's absolutely fine. And there's one more element that we need for our form, which is, of course, the button. Okay. Now, there are two ways of doing the submit button. You can actually use an input type submit, or you can use button, which is also submit. Now, I would recommend that you use button type submit rather than input type submit, simply because the button type is a HTML5, I believe, more accurate, and therefore they may eventually start to depreciate the input type submit. And then in the little text here, we're just going to put in what we're going to put in. We are going to put in login, just the word login. And once again, we're going to put a class inside this. So class equals login dot underscore and we'll put submit. Okay, so the class types here are nothing funny, nothing, anything unusual. They're just very simple classes which are descriptive of their nature. So we save that and we'll have a look as it stands. So we'll open it with live server. Let's just close that down now. And this is what we have. Okay, now this doesn't look very pretty. All right, it's a very basic version. Okay, all things in a row. So this is what you might see on some websites. Okay, although there might be a slight variation to it, which I will talk about in a moment. But it's just a fairly straightforward. Now, a lot of places will prefer them underneath each other. And there are some really clever, not even really clever to be honest, there are some ways to do it using pure CSS, but actually there's no need. I was one of the people that used to do this purely on CSS. I felt like it used to be almost like a badge of honor, like if you can't do it using CSS, then you shouldn't be doing it because you don't know enough code. But actually, I realized I was just being an idiot. And the easiest way is just to put in a BR. Okay, there's no need to mess about. Just put a BR there for a new line, a BR there. So after the end of each input, we've got a new line. And then our button will also be on a new line as well. So we save that, we go back and look at the page, and that looks a bit better. Okay, so our problem's going to be now is that it doesn't, because the word username is a bit longer, or I've missed out the code on there and password, it'd be nice to format these out a little bit. So first thing is, let's put that in there. Okay, so this is all about sort of like simple formatting. Okay, just to make things look slightly better. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, even though we could just do it with labels, we've actually got a class attached to them now. So we'll do that. And one of the reasons for this is one of the reasons why we don't just use the label element on its own is that there are a lot of websites where both the login and the registration forms will be on the same page. And you want to make sure that you do not make one rule that applies to both sides when you don't need it to. Okay, so login labels, okay. And what we're going to do first is give them a width. Okay, so I'm going to make the width up at the moment. I'm going to go for 150 pixels. And what we're also going to do, in fact, we'll do what we've done before, where I just make my page a bit nicer so we can see both at the same time. We'll see that as I save these, we can see the changes as they happen. So you can see that actually 150 wasn't enough because username's a bit bigger than 150. So let's make that 170. Right, now I just realized why that won't happen. You see, labels by default are what we call inline elements, and inline elements by default do not have a width value. They just will ignore it. So to get around that, we need to tell it to display as an inline block element, which will allow that to be the case. So now when we save that, suddenly, boom, seeing how far that moved out, that's because even 150 was actually far too big. So let's just drop this down to something like 140 pixels. Okay, even that's a bit too big. Let's see what 100 looks like. Okay, now the other thing I like doing is moving my text to the right hand side when we have forms. So this time we'll do text align and to the right. And we see that that looks a lot nicer. Okay, and we've got some space there as well, but sometimes you might just want to add a little margin. Okay, only a small margin, so margin on the right, and maybe 5 pixels or so. It's just to give it that little extra spacing. So there's a distance, makes it look a little bit more professional. Appreciate Mr. Login button. It's not looking too good at the moment. Don't worry, we will deal with that in a tick. So the next thing we'll notice is that we'll look at our forms and we go, well, look at the form elements. And again, just to show you as talking about before, this is normal text field and that is your password field. Okay. Now what's nice is that they are both the same length. That's not always the case. I think actually only in Chrome, it's only been about 2 years or so where the password and normal text fields were the same length. For years, the password field was always slightly smaller. And whoops, cancel. And this may be the same for other browsers. So for safety, we would look at the login text. So we've got login. What did we call it? Let me just close it down so we can see it. Text field. It's text hyphen field. And we can set the width to, again, let's set it at 150 pixels just for the moment. Yeah, they're a bit smaller. Okay. We can also see that they're touching each other, and there's, well, at least right now we're in the COVID-19 crisis, and we're going to have a 2 meter distance. It might be a bit too big for our form fields, but let's give them a little bit of a distance. So what we'll do is we'll do a margin bottom. Again, it only needs to be about 5 pixels or so. Okay, it doesn't have to be big. 10 pixels maybe, 5 or 10. Just to give that bit of separation, just makes them look a little bit neater. Okay, and we can do loads of other things as well. All right, We're going to do a lot more decoration and stuff later on, especially when we start moving on to the registration forms. Okay, we're just going to build this up bit by bit, so I'm not overloading you with information. We're just going to leave those for the moment, I think, because for a simple form that's fine. But this login button's really not in the right place, is it? Okay, we really want the login further over. So it's got its login submit, which is handy. So we go for .login _submit. And again, there's different ways we can do this. I think the easiest way is to give it a left-hand margin. Okay, some people might talk about giving it a auto width and auto margin, so it'd be automatically centered. The problem with that is that we haven't actually done anything with our login form, so there's no width set to our login form, and therefore our form is probably going to be the full width of the page. In fact, if we go into developer tools, which is F12 on your browser, and we click on form here, like I said, you can see how the form takes up the entire width of the page. Now, perhaps if we restricted our form so that it only fitted the area that's being used, we could then do margin auto to make it look nicer. But since we're not doing that, so what we'll do instead is just to more or less center this. Okay, so again, we'll do a margin, once I've learnt to spell, margin left. And now we know, for example, that our label's 100 pixels with a 5 pixel right hand border, so that's 105. And we know that our text field is 150, so it's 255 in total. So roughly half that is 125, but we've also got the width of the button, so let's just go for a margin left of about 100 pixels. Probably actually needs to be a bit less than that, but we'll just have a look. Actually, maybe a bit more. So let's go for 120, like I said before. Yeah, that's probably about right. If I'm going to be honest, I probably would move it more. Yeah, 135 looks a lot better for me. Okay, so that, as you can see, is a really, really simple version of the form. Because this video is already creeping up to half an hour or so, I'm going to stop this video here. And in the next videos, we're going to be looking at different variations of this. So how can we make this? How can we make the form look nicer? Different variations. For example, do we need labels? Are there alternatives to the labels? Okay, and with that, are there different ways that we can perhaps put our form elements in a different position? So all that in the next video. So as usual, I appreciate it's been a long one. I hope it's been useful. Please do that, like, subscribe and all that jazz for me at the bottom. This is Stan signing out, and see you in the next video.